Interlude. This comes after Chapter 5 and before Chapter 6. The Convocation. A small sign in the hotel lobby announced that the Washington room was taken that night by a private function, although there was no information as to what kind of a function this might be. Truthfully, if you were to look at the inhabitants of the Washington room that night, you would have no clearer idea of what was happening, although a rapid glance would tell you that there were no women in there. They were all men. That much was clear, and they sat around at round dinner tables, and they were finishing their dessert. There were about 100 of them, all in sober black suits, but the suits were all they had in common. They had white hair or dark hair or fair hair or red hair or no hair at all. They had friendly faces or unfriendly, helpful or sullen, open or secretive, brutish or sensitive. The majority of them were pink-skinned, but there were black-skinned men and brown-skinned. They were European, African, Indian, Chinese, South American, Filipino, American. They all spoke English when they talked to each other or to the waiters, but their accents were as diverse as the gentlemen. They came from all across Europe and from all over the world. The men in black suits sat around their tables while up on a platform one of their number, a wide, cheery man, dressed in a morning suit as if he had just come from a wedding, was announcing good deeds done. Children from poor places had been taken on exotic holidays. A bus had been brought to take people who needed it on excursions. The man Jack sat at the front center table beside a dapper man with silver-white hair. They were waiting for coffee. "Time's a-ticking," said the silver-haired man, "and we are none of us getting any younger." The man Jack said, "I've been thinking. That business in San Francisco 4 years ago was unfortunate, but like the flowers that bloom in the spring, tra-la, absolutely nothing to do with the case. You failed, Jack. You were meant to take care of all of them. That included the baby, especially the baby. Nearly only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades." A waiter in a white jacket poured coffee for each of the men at the table. A small man with a pencil-thin black mustache, a tall blond man, good-looking enough to be a film star or a model, and a dark-skinned man with a huge head who glared out at the world like an angry bull. These men were making a point of not listening to Jack's conversation, and instead were paying attention to the speaker, even clapping from time to time. The silver-haired man added several heaped spoonfuls of sugar to his coffee, stirred it briskly. 10 years, he said. Time and tide wait for no man. The babe will soon be grown, and then what? "I still have time, Mr. Dandy," said the man Jack began, but the silver-haired man cut him off, stabbing a large pink finger in his direction. "You had time. Now you just have a deadline. Now you've got to get smart. We can't cut you any slack, not any more. Sick of waiting we are, every man Jack of us." The man Jack nodded curtly. "I have leads to follow," he said. The silver-haired man slurped his black coffee. "Really?" "Really, and I repeat, I think it's connected with the trouble we had in San Francisco." "You've discussed this with the secretary?" Mr. Dandy indicated the man at the podium, who was at that moment telling them about hospital equipment bought in the previous year from their generosity. "Not 1, not 2, but 3 kidney machines," he was saying. The men in the room applauded themselves and their generosity politely. The man Jack nodded. "I've mentioned it." "And?" "He's not interested. He just wants results. He wants me to finish the business I started." "We all do, sunshine," said the silver-haired man. "The boy's still alive, and time is no longer our friend." The other men at the table, who had pretended not to be listening, grunted and nodded their agreement. "Like I say, Mr. Dandy," Mr. Dandy said without emotion, "time's a-ticking." I noticed something. I noticed a couple things. Maybe you did too. One thing I noticed was this image right at the beginning of the chapter. It looked really familiar to me, and I couldn't place it. And then I thought about it, and I remembered something. Ooh, yikes. Don't do that. I remembered something from earlier in the book. Okay, let me show you two things. One, and 2. Look at the hand. Looks almost identical. And that black background, that's the only drawings that have that black background that we've seen so far. Uh-oh, Mr. Parker's calling. I better take this. And there's one other thing I wanted to point out. So there was the hand holding the cup and holding the knife, and then in the end of this section, it's not really a chapter. They call it the interlude between chapters. It says the man Jack's kind of arguing with this guy named Mr. Dandy, and we can't cut you any slack, not anymore. Sick of waiting, we are, every man Jack of us. So that's the weird part, that name Jack keeps coming up. And then the man Jack nodded curtly. I have leads to follow, he said. Silver-haired man slurped his black coffee. Really? Really, and I repeat, I think it's connected with the trouble we had in San Francisco. That felt important to me. Why would he bring that up? And then I remembered something else from earlier in the book, and I flipped back and I looked, and sure enough, I don't know if you remember this, but back when Silas went away, he came back. Do you remember what he brought Bod? He brought him a little miniature Golden Gate Bridge from San Francisco. And it was just a little passing thing. But it caught my attention. The fact that San Francisco came up twice. That the first time Silas had to leave the graveyard, it was to go. And I think when he went originally, he said, did you learn anything while you were away? Oh, yes, said Silas, but he declined to elaborate. So I'm thinking there's something going on between Silas and this group, the Man Jack, the Jacks, or the group that the Man Jack is a part of. Every Man Jack of us. Just some stuff to think about.